Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
And welcome back, folks, to Through a Scottish Prism. Lovely to have you. The time you're watching this, actually, I will be in Dunfermline, having attended the Alapa Party National Council and NEC. So, if I'm not quite topical today, blame these two, because I'm joined as ever by my two pals, the Paisley Mohawk himself, Iain Lawson, and the Coatbridge Cavalier, Phil Boswell, to discuss what's been happening this week. Gentlemen, and I use the term loosely and lightly, how are you?
Very well,
good.
Good. It's been a busy week, and it'll get even busier. But I think the biggest talking point this week, Iain, was the Health and Care Act down in England, which is going to have repercussions in Scotland. But it is a disgrace what they're trying to do, and the opposition are not doing much to stop them.
Certainly aren't. I mean, this goes back, I remember during the referendum in 2014, regularly mentioning that if we voted no, we were going to face these challenges, and been told by everyone, including, by the way, surprisingly, some people in the SNP who said that the Margot Mobile should not be using that particular message. But as usual, events have proved this to be correct. I think the most dangerous thing about what's happening down south is that the government seem to see nothing wrong at all in allowing private companies to use the NHS logo. And it's a very clever, surreptitious way of introducing private medicine into the National Health Service. And, you know, we should be very, very aware of that. No one other than the NHS themselves should be permitted to use the NHS logo. The 37 billion track and trace disaster down south, they were allowed to use the NHS logo. So basically that horrendous failure is, you know, to all intents and purposes, associated with the NHS, when in fact, of course, it had nothing to do with the NHS. So this is just typical Tory tactics, sneakily introducing private medicine into the NHS and doing it in a way that people don't notice until it's too late. But of course, as Roddy, you've already pointed out, it has horrendous implications under Barnett and the funding in future coming to the Scottish National Health Service. So it does affect us, even though it's happening in England rather than in Scotland at the moment.
But Phil, you are an MP for a while down there, and you know as well as I do, the likelihood of this being forced on the Tories to change their mind about this, it's unlikely.
It's never going to happen. I mean, when there was 56 of us out of 59, and that's going to reduce by 2, as we previously discussed, we could outvote 1 or 2 different regions in or counties in England, but we have no impact whatsoever on the voting. There's very, very few things you can vote on. So anybody who thinks that engaging at Westminster is going to change anything, what have we achieved? Give me the list of the, and we tried, and don't get me wrong, there's some good people down there trying very hard, but we have consistently failed since we've had representation at Westminster. We're simply outvoted on everything. Often out of spite, even if Labour agree with us, they will stand against us because we threaten them in Scotland. It's just not equitable.
Yeah, no, I'm not having a go here at the SNP from people start saying that, but they did what they normally do. Is this was an England only matter, and a lot of them didn't bother to vote. Now, while I admire their principles in doing that, I think on this occasion they were wrong. Just my personal opinion, I think everyone that was able to vote against this should have voted against it. If you'd been there, would you have voted against it?
Yes. I mean, when evil was introduced, it's designed specifically, obviously, to counter
but that's gone.
what would have involved governments.
They've removed evil.
Yeah, but the whole principle The whole principle, the whole philosophy hasn't changed. They will do everything and anything they can to ensure that they undermine and destabilise anything that SNP try to do down there. And when you go into, people maybe don't realise, when you go into discuss a bill, you're in a bill committee, and there's always one or two more of the sitting party, and they just, no matter what you discuss, they always outvote you. So the chances of making a difference, I mean, the best I saw was 2 or maybe 3 of us in any one meeting, you know, or 2 votes, myself and Callum McCaig on the energy bill. And you're just putting something down that's recorded, as you said, everybody's ignoring you. And quite openly.
Yeah, I mean, this is old hat, Iain. I've got a really controversial idea. How about if we went for independence? That's about the only, seriously, and I jest slightly, but it's the only way to save us from what I think will be the NHS getting sold off in both England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. And also, I would caution that Scottish Water must be in their sights, Iain.
It must be, as must fracking. You know, I mean, this is a government that are intent in doing whatever they want in Scotland. We might even see GM crops because the government are taking powers away from the Scottish Parliament. They say they're going to hold them for only 7 years. But if you've been involved in politics, an awful lot can change in 7 months, never mind 7 years. And even if they kept their word and 7 years later they handed these powers back, what would have been the impact of what they've been doing for the 7 years? And nobody talks about this. You know, I mean, the SNP make all the usual noises. We're going to fight this tooth and nail. But Phil's just explained, in the real world, that means nothing.
No.
If you're going to fight it, you need to go for independence. But what's Nicola saying? Nicola's saying time is on our side.
It isn't. It isn't.
It's just a complete lie. And, you know, you don't need to know much about politics to work that out. You can see what's happening in front of your own eyes. As Grouse Peter pointed out today, if demographics don't change, Scots will be an ethnic minority in Scotland by 2050. How can you hope to win independence when that happens? I mean, and, you know, you've got the leader of the independence movement saying, time's on our side, no panic, we'll wait to the end of COVID, you know, and then, you know, it'll be just as well she wasn't around during the Ice Age. You know, we'd have been waiting for the end of the Ice Age. We'd all frozen to death. I mean, it's unbelievable. We're really, really, really badly led in Scotland.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but what's more disconcerting actually is when you think about in whose hands the 7-year control is going to sit. And you look at the difference between the philosophy and the policy. I mean, we want to retain or reverse the privatisation of the NHS. We want our post offices back in public hands. We want our rail network back in public hands. I can't believe, I'm a bit kicking myself when I say it, but I've got to say it. Why did the SNP back away from an energy company that's a nationalised energy company? I wanted to go further. I worked for Statoil. I worked in Stavanger in Norway with Statoil. I see what they did with their every barrel counts. I know how it works. And when we come on to talk about oil and gas later, as we will, and energy, I can give you some stats that will blow your mind. But the bottom line is we have got the potential here to take control of our country, our resources, and use them wisely for the benefit of the people of Scotland. And we're sitting about fighting battles that have no relevance to the majority of the people of Scotland, and that has to change.
I agree. I would go further. I would nationalise all the utilities as well, and the buses too. Bring that back. But the only choice we have got is to take control. Now, if I was in charge, the minute the Health and Care Act was pushed through Westminster, I'd have been on the trumpet down to London and saying, well, I tell you what, we're leaving. We're out of here. We're not hanging about for this. So either get rid of that or we're withdrawn from the union. But Iain, there's absolute compliance by lack of doing anything. They They just pay lip service as if it doesn't matter. Everything will be all right.
You can rhyme through a list. I mean, the last 7 years, you can rhyme through a whole list. You remember them, like the Duke of York, leading everybody to the top of the hill. We were, Brexit, we will not be dragged out of Brexit against our will. What happened? They were dragged out of Brexit and there wasn't a lot of will about at the time. They weren't willing to do anything, So, I mean, the credibility of this SNP government is absolutely nil. In fact, it's minus if you were to talk to me, because they don't even talk a good game anymore. They just go along and, I wouldn't even say that Westminster needs to bully them. They're so compliant. They just go along. They'll make a couple of wee squeals here and there, but nobody takes it seriously. They know when it comes to the crunch, Nicola will back down.
But there's nothing to stop us just now, Phil, calling a citizens' assembly, recalling all our members of parliament, calling on our councillors, getting Civic Scotland, and withdrawing from the Treaty of Union. There's nothing to stop us doing that, apart from the anti-Scottish media who will scream, and the house jock parties will scream. But legally and every other way, there's nothing to stop us doing that today, is there?
Well, again, there's experts on both sides of this argument that have to be listened to, but I'm very much leaning towards the Alf Beards in this world, and various other specialists who've looked at this and come up with. Well, I put it this way: the proposition put forward by Alf, I have yet to see credibly challenged. I've yet to see evident. Because I am an independent supporter based on evidence. It was evidence based that I make decisions. I'm kind of science background, and I'm looking forward. I look to scientific data, and the oil and gas industry, and everything I do, I look for evidence, and I try to keep an open mind as much as I can. And there is absolutely no doubt that I can see, as far as I can see, that there has been no challenge put forward to this proposition. But what's most disconcerting is the fact that this proposition has not been taken seriously enough by the powers that be in Scotland, because only the government of Scotland could use this. And currently we have a majority in the Houses of Parliament among Scottish representation, in the Scottish Parliament, in the councils. I just hope we do not rue the day that we never used this, because I fear for it.
Yeah, I don't believe you. Several prisms ago, Iain, we spoke about when Nicola Sturgeon was talking about the Four Nations, and she suddenly, out of the blue, suggested that oil should be a Four Nations solution. Scotland's oil, the thing that, if you take it from Winnie Ewing, just post Winnie Ewing onwards, just after when she got elected in '67. Scotland's oil was the thing that brought, awareness to the Scottish people, and suddenly thought, well, we're sitting in a gold mine, and now she wants to hand it away. And the Campbell field, which is I believe, I might be wrong, you can correct us if we're wrong in this one, Phil. I believe it's the biggest find ever, isn't it? It's one of, if not the biggest.
800 million barrels.
Yeah, no, Info took a quid for each. Just took a quid for each barrel. 800 billion is not bad. And not including all the jobs, but she wants to leave it in the ground. And as we heard someone saying to us the other day, if you go around that Moray Coast, Aberdeenshire, that was the whitefish capital of the UK. That's gone because of Brexit. And now Nicola Sturgeon wants to see 100,000 people out of work in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire.
Yeah,
not clever politics.
It makes no sense, but I mean, nothing in the SNP these days. I mean, the NEC, here's a world exclusive for the Prism show. The SNP NEC met last Saturday, and I was speaking the other day to one of the NEC members who was desperately disappointed that Nicola hadn't turned up, because they were intending to ask Nicola when the decades-long SNP policy on oil and gas had been changed, because he'd never heard it come up on the NEC. There's no National Council anymore. It's never come up at conference. So who in the party gave Nicola Sturgeon the go-ahead to announce that policy was being changed? She had no power. It's a cabal operating without any comeback to the ordinary member whatsoever. And, you know, as you mentioned there, it probably involves a loss of at least 100,000 jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them will be party members, you know, and they must be looking on at this and saying, what the hell's going on here? Who gave her the right to say this? We should have a debate.
Maybe Stonewall, Iain. Could have been Stonewall. Maybe they don't like oil extraction.
Well, they've maybe not got any male tampons in the men's changing rooms out of the oil fields. That would be enough to get Stonewall against it. But no, I mean, if you look at what Alex said, much more sensible, much more balanced, that if you're wanting to have carbon capture as an example, you need to fund it. How are you going to fund it, you know, if you're not, you know, still developing oil and taking some of the revenues from that to pay for it? You know, it's just childish, political, kid-on knowledge. And that's what we get from the Scottish Government day in, day out.
I mean,
Phil,
Phil, I'm just going. Phil, am I right in saying that the Norway oil fund now sits at $2 trillion, and Nicola's willing to throw that away for what? I don't know. Tell us about the Campbell field, what that will bring to our economy.
Okay, the first thing I think we should do is be fair to Nicola. I think what Nicola was expressing was a personal, if you ask me, type of question. So I'm not necessarily saying that it's policy. Yeah, and we touched on that last time, what is and what isn't policy. We need to be very careful about. So it may very well just be a personal
well, she shouldn't say it. She should not be saying that. She should think of her position as leader of the Scottish Government and the Scottish National Party and think, well, she should have put that caveat in if it's just her personal opinion.
I would agree with that because this is what oil and gas means. I mean, I lived in the northeast in a beautiful wee village, Torfins. Aberdeenshire is a great place. It's it had the jute industry, it had the whitefish industry, it had the fishing industry. Now it's got, well, then it had the oil industry. And are we seriously going to pull the rug from under it? Because we're moving right round. I mentioned we started at 3 o'clock down in Felixstowe. That's where oil was found, but we've moved into deeper and harsher waters, and we're moving round into the west coast. So the Campbell field is west of Shetland. It's right at the front of our limitations in terms of depth, pressure, and roughness of seas. It's the roughness of seas that stops you operating. Okay, that's what makes it difficult. So it's about, I think it's about 1,100 meters, which is pretty deep. It's a Savannah-style FPSO, and FPSO is a floating production, storage and offloading facility. Normally it's a ship-shaped beast that sits on a turret that swivels in weather vanes, moored to the seabed with pliant wave risers, flow lines and umbilicals, connecting it to the seabed where you get the gathering systems, the Christmas trees, all of that type of stuff, where you gather up the oil and gas and take it up for processing. And an FPSO is effectively a vessel with a small refinery on top. So it does part of the refinery, certainly the washing, separating. You got all those processes on it. So this is a complicated piece of kit. But the Savannah, the one that I've looked at here, is a simpler model. It doesn't need to weather vane because there's no turret on it because it's round. It's completely round.
Where do they make these things you're talking about?
Well, not in Scotland.
No,
and that's the annoying thing, because we used to we could so easily fit it out. I mean, there's the way to start. You could easily do this by refitting. You start with a shipyard. The problem goes back to what Alf was talking about. Where's the facilities and the dry docks for building beasts of this size? They're in Korea. The shipyards in Korea. They're in Japan. They're in China. They're all over the world except here, because we haven't invested in our ports since the Victorian era. I mean, seriously, some basic upgrades. But Campbell is not actually a big field. It's not that. They're currently marketing. I've taken out some figures, right? It's 51,000 barrels per day. Now at $82.25 a barrel, which it is today, it's about just over $4 million a day. Okay, a day for 25 years. Now,
that's nearly as much as you earn, Iain.
And then there's the gas. I mean, we've also got gas. People forget that. And 96% of the oil is in Scottish waters. Why do you think the pressure that England wants to hang on to us or London wants to keep it off us?
I thought it was
The
a
field is
charm.
8 million in barrels,
No,
but
not a
it's
charm.
mastery of gay wit and repartee. That's what it's about. But the 800 million barrels is oil in place, guys. And oil in place is different. Well, it's very different from oil reserves. There is no field in the planet, or there used to be no field in the planet where you're getting over 50% of the oil out of the oil in place. So the calculations through various tried and tested technology, you can tell how much is in there, but you never get it all out. Now, it can range, depends on the porosity of the rock and a whole bunch of different stuff. Whether when I was at BP and Quad 204 in Clear Ridge, we were using desalinated water. So we were increasing this low sal it's called, and you get, it acts as a better catalyst to separate the particles. Anyway, you get more out, but you're talking about 50, 60, 70, 80 is the best that I hear has ever been achieved, but I find it difficult to believe because it wasn't that long ago where no well had more than 50% of the oil recovered. Now, if the field has 800 million barrels and you're between 30, 40, 50%, my last job, Quad 204, was targeting 130,000 barrels a year. So if you add all these oil fields up, okay, the UK shelf produces, it dropped during COVID, but we should be heading back up to about 900,000 barrels per day. 900,000.
You mean
barrels.
Scottish waters or in British waters?
British waters.
Okay.
96% of which are in Scottish waters. And even in 1999, just before devolution, Blair's government moved the border.
Yeah.
They moved the border to take control of some of the fields, but it's illegal. It's against UNCLOS, United Nations Constitution and the law of the sea. So we go independent, we just take it back because that's what the rules are. That's what the international rules are. Tony Blair doesn't get to make them up. So 900,000 barrels a day, on the production value of that is 72 million per day. That's the sale price at the current market value at $80 a barrel. Bear in mind the record for Brent crude was $145 a day. Right? You getting where I'm going here? Brent crude is one of the most all oil prices. WTI is quoted, which is West Texas Intermediate, they're all blends, okay, between heavy oils and light oils, and they've got to be conformed to a certain viscosity, the specification, etc., etc. The standards have to be met to be sold as that category of oil. Brent crude has always been one of the most expensive, high quality oils on the planet. Right?
Yeah, we were told. I remember when oil came out first, we were told it was the wrong type of oil, and it would only be good for heating. You remember that, Ian?
I remember it well. Yes.
Yeah, it's only good for heating.
It was a lie, and
no shit. The Brits lied. My God, paint me pink, call me Sally.
Yeah. The first country in the world to discover oil and become poorer. That's what tells you all about Westminster.
Yeah.
When Nicholas says we've got plenty of time, you know, London is stealing 72 million.
Billion, maybe. There must be more than that.
Which in today's figures at $80 a barrel is 26,280 million per year in revenue. Okay, billion. And if you take crude, that's at $80 a barrel, and crude got to 145, remember. Norway, you talked about Norway, the couple of trillion. They've invested heavily in research and development, which we've not. We've lost a lot of ground to Norway because we didn't invest in research and development. We were at the forefront of. See what happened. What happened in Felixstowe when it first happened? They just pushed an oil rig into the sea. The Americans came along. Oh, we've got water offshore. What do we do? And they just went, push the oil rig into the sea. Shallow waters, no problem. As you get deeper, the technology, rougher seas, it becomes more difficult.
I don't know if you had to ask you a question, Phil. I remember reading some time ago in the Gulf of Mexico, some oil fields that they thought were expired suddenly started filling up again as the oil
Yes.
Is it?
Well, it's called enhanced oil recovery. Sometimes it's natural, but what I mean, I don't know. It's quite crude, I suppose, but it's like a pimple. If you prick a pimple, some pus comes out, right? But if you apply pressure to it, you get all or most of the pus out.
Which is
Right.
lovely.
Same with an oil field. So what you got to do is you keep pressurizing. So what we do is we pressure inject oil reservoirs. And reservoirs, it's not a hole in the ground. It's not a ball with oil in it or gas in it. Gas at the top, oil below it. It's porous rock. You've got non-porous rock as the cap, so that it can't rise above it. It's captured there, and it's trapped in a kind of bubble. So what you do is you drill down below the reservoir and pressure inject either seawater or desalinated water, which is more effective, or gas. It depends what you're taking out. And that keeps the pressure, as you're tapping out the top, it keeps the pressure stable, and you maximize what you take out of the reservoir. So what also happens is it's hard to, you can't see, it's very difficult to see underground. A lot of these reservoirs are connected, or there may be another reservoir even deeper that maybe just, it's like water, it flows the least path of resistance. So yeah, a geologist will explain that better.
Well, I'll get one of them on next week.
Well, I'm not a geologist, but I would like to just ask Phil a question. I mean, I think I'm quite aware about Statoil as well. I saw the remarkable spin out of their petrol stations across the whole Eastern Europe when, you know, the wall came down. And, you know, that I think is one of the main differences. In Norway, they kept control of the whole process from start to finish. You know, the oil discovery, oil refinery, out using their own stations, petrol stations, as an example. You know, and also the rules in Norway, as I understand them, is if you require any equipment, you've got to be able to demonstrate in Norway to the Norwegian government that if you're planning to buy it outside Norway, you've got to prove that it's not available within Norway. And that way they get the absolute maximum benefit of the whole production cycle, which we get none of, because the much maligned Tony Benn, when he set up the British National Oil Corporation, it was taken off him, you know, put into the private sector. And that opportunity to do the same as what Statoil had done was lost at that particular point, and it's cost us dear ever since.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it, Iain? That everything they do in the UK is done, and that's been the problem. Take our politics of independence out of it, but the problem for the UK has always been short-termism. Make a quick buck, don't invest, you know, maximise the profit for this year and maybe next year, as they did with I mean, the fact that the United Kingdom doesn't really have a car industry is a disgrace. Because I mean, all the other countries have kept them. You know, we didn't invest in them and invest in them properly. We didn't invest in our shipyards. We didn't, you know, we don't invest. We take the quick profit, and that's exactly what they're trying to do with the oil, which I think is what Phil's alluding to. Do you not think so?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that the whole, you know, procedures that operate at Westminster are all short-termism, and it's worse than that. It's short-termism to the benefit of our supporters. It's a completely corrupt circle. I mean, as Al spoke last week, Prism, you know, who would ever, in their right mind, allow an important infrastructure thing like ports to be in the hands of hedge funds? You know, who have got no interest whatsoever in investing. You know, what they're interested in is
maximising profit.
The most they can. And of course, to do that, they've got to put their prices up all the time, which makes the Scottish ports uneconomic in comparison to some ports down south. I mean, this is all a fix, a giant fix. You know, and we really need to get some politicians in there that are willing to stand up and expose these fixes. Because once you start doing that, Scottish people will start listening. But all that namby-pamby, don't rock the boat, we've got to look after the soft no voter. Let's find folk that have got a brain in their head. There's a lot more of them no voters. And let's expose what's going on. And that's the way to win independence.
Yeah, because the problem we've got, and it is a fault that the unionists badly tried to hit with and didn't manage it through us, but we do have extensive powers that Holyrood feel, a lot of which we're not using.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that goes into more than just oil and gas, obviously. But just to finish on the oil and gas, what Iain touched on a point that's well worth considering. The Scottish voter is smarter than the average bear, and I would say the advice I would give is look at the production figures, not the accounts. When it's the same as GERS or GERS, you want to look at that and believe it, you're welcome to do so. But the critiques on them are very clear. It's clever accounting. And
crooked accounting.
It's crooked.
If you did it in a real business, you would go to jail.
Oh, you go to jail. You would go to jail. But if you look at the production figures, that's what you need to look at, and then the oil figure and do the simple arithmetic, and then you figure out, because what you see is when you compare, like the Norwegians have got, they're making 160 million a day, okay, and currently have 58.5 billion of production sales a year. Latest figures I could get a hold of. And that's why they've got this oil fund. That's why they've got the highest. They don't do poverty. They don't do homelessness, etc. They don't do any of that. Their people are looked after.
Yeah. And
that's what is being stolen from the Scottish people, and it's been ignored by people who should know better. Don't upset them. Don't irritate them. Don't talk about oil. Oil, we should be screaming about oil. We should. It's like it's a get out of jail. Let's get. This is the thing. What people don't understand. What's civilizing in the planet is, as soon as the society becomes enriched or better off, then the whole floor of their societal, medical, health, everything, wealth, everything rises. And there's one thing that works for that more than anything else, where in the part of the country I am in, and it's the empowerment of women. That's what works. You give women control over a birth cycle. You give control, maybe the bit of, and I'm paraphrasing a quite brilliant man called Christopher Hitchens. You should check him out on this. And if you give them, if you're generous enough to give them some seed and a wee bit of funding, watch the whole village rise. But they need control over the birth cycle, not their husbands or the wise man of the village. This is the same kind of thing for an evolved country like Scotland, to the degree that we are now giving away something that we can use to take us to the next level. And we use it wisely.
You were talking about Norway. I read somewhere recently that if the oil was to stop tomorrow, they've got enough money to give 30 years of welfare, pensions, healthcare, everything in their fund.
I think that was only when it was 1 trillion. It's 2 trillion now.
Well, it could be 60 years now. Exactly. But and then that's something that Nicola's saying, well, we should just leave it where it is. Let's stop taking oil out of the ground. But it's not just oil. What a lot of people don't realise is that, plastics, syringes, you name it, we extract from oil. It's not just to heat your house or drive your car or run a ship or fly a plane. There's plastics, there's all sorts of stuff comes from the raw product.
Yeah, that's the problem. Moving oil companies do not fear switches. Using oil and using gasoline is a waste of this precious resource. It's not efficient. There's better ways to do this. Going electric's fine, but it's actually not that green when you look at the details. It's not as green as people think.
That's a program all on its own.
Yeah. It is, and we maybe not touch on here.
We should also talk about why they took all the oil from the North Sea and piped it into Teesside. That was for the plastics industry.
Mm-hmm.
That was to make sure the plastic jobs would appear in Teesside rather than in Scotland.
Yeah.
No other country in the world would tolerate that sort of behaviour. No. It's like Saudi Arabia saying, well, why don't you just put all our oil into Libya or wherever around about? They would never accept it. We did.
I know, but now we've got to do something. But we need to be using more powers. And I think I've often said on here and in private when we've been chatting, we should be using powers even that we don't have and pushing at the door all the time. But the powers that we've got, Iain, for example, I know for the two of you, land reform, like myself, is something that you're big on, and that there is nothing to stop our government today doing something about that.
Well, absolutely, but it's not a good sign that Nicola appointed to a group of economic advisors, the Duke of Buccleuch, his landowner in Scotland, factor, to join it. I suspect he's not going to be too keen in that.
No, I don't expect to. I'm sure Lord McPherson would help out, don't you think?
I've got a credit here for someone still in the SNP, but, you know, there was a very, very good pamphlet book produced by an SNP member who's toured the country, putting forward a projection how you could use annual ground rent through land reform to fund virtually everything. It could fund everything. Now, we can't and we don't have the powers to do that at the moment, but we do have the powers in the existing Scottish legislation to use it to replace business rates. Now, that would be a very clever start, because it's not going to be possible. I'll tell you now, I know a lot of people in the hospitality industry, and it's not going to be possible to reintroduce business rates in the current climate, because they're all struggling, you know, with the effects of COVID. It's completely unrealistic to expect them to pay the sort of huge sums that are asked of them. I mean, we own a tiny restaurant, and our rateable value is £23,500. You know, I mean, you know, we've only got 40 seats in the restaurant. How are you supposed to? How many meals need to go out to pay that? Now, I mean, we are by no means the worst off. There's a lot worse than us. But I'm just making the point. It's not practical. It ain't going to work. So what you've got to do is look at alternatives. And every politician, for as long as I've been on the planet in Scotland, have been scared stiff of looking at local government funding. You know, because they're scared stiff because they know what's happened in the past with rate and revaluations and all the rest of it. Moving to this removes all that because it spreads the load. It also creates an incentive for people that own land to do something.
Can you explain how it works, so for the viewers who are watching, how this works?
Well, basically, you divide up all the land. We know in Scotland who owns the land, and you work out basically, you'll probably have an urban charge and a rural charge, the rural charge being much lower. And you calculate what's due in each bit of land. So you take your overall expenditure and you divide it by the land available. Now, what this does, by the way, it makes sure the Queen pays for the land she owns. It makes sure...
I wouldn't count on it.
All these hedge funds can't avoid paying the same. It makes sure all the grouse moors have to make a contribution. You know, so there's a much wider, if you like, base of people paying into that pot. Now, I've seen this work. I mean, I always come back to this, but I mean, Estonia pays its entire local government revenues through annual ground rent. So, I mean, and there's plenty of other countries do it now as well. So, I mean, it's perfectly practical to do. And we should be doing it, because the one thing we've got is we've got a lot of land and not so many people. And the trouble is, a lot of our land is owned by a very few small number of people who don't pay anything like the contribution that they should. And because they can get away with that, there's no incentive there to force them to utilise the land for good. Whereas with annual ground rent, you pay the same whether there's a building on it or whatever. You know, so it encourages people to actually develop the land that they own, and that in turn creates jobs and creates, you know, investment, and the whole economy benefits. Now, Graham McCormick's this chap's name in the SNP, and he's done a booklet which is available. You can. He lives in Helensburgh. He's a estate agent lawyer, and he's very, very knowledgeable in this. He's got a great presentation that spells out what the average cost would be for, you know, and the vast bulk of people benefit, because that small number of people who own, yeah, exactly, they're forced to pay an equitable amount for the first time in history, and as a result of that, you end up with a much fairer system that benefits all the people of Scotland.
Your Mr. McCormick sounds like someone I should get on here for me.
Very
well,
much.
If you do that, then I would strongly suggest that you get the flip side of this, Graham obviously is coming from the business side, so the yin and the yang of that would be to get Andy Whiteman on, the previous MSP for the Greens, who wrote the definitive. I know. Maybe not.
I wouldn't have a problem. I think he might have a problem with me.
Well, this is a really important matter. There's a book that has to be said. His book, The Poor That Know Lawyers, Who Owns Scotland, and How They Got It, is the definitive piece. It's quite brilliant. I mean, you should check out his website.
Yeah, I always had a great deal of admiration for him.
Oh, me too. To educate us all on this subject, Roddy, I mean, Graham and Andy on one show, I mean, he spent a lifetime living and working this subject and would easily be able to cover all the angles except the business side, which Graham would come in, because you're going to get and that's how it should be. It should be reasoned debate, logical, fair, listening to each other and debating. That's what we want to hear, and we'll find some middle course.
I'm not sure there'd be that much conflict, because having read Andy Whiteman's book, I mean, he calls Scotland
brilliant,
our greatest under-resourced resource, So, I mean, I'm sure he's going to be keen to find ways, and he'll certainly talk extensively about land reform, And, I mean, people that sit and live in cities and all that, I live in Paisley, it should be a city, it's the largest town in Scotland, but I mean, I read Andy Whiteman's book or anything, and it applies to me. I read Graham's book, it applies to me,
Closure Act.
People think land reform, that must be all these estates and all that. No. A lot of it, I mean, I read the other week there, the Church of England's one of the biggest landowners in Scotland. I can't remember them ever making any contribution.
No.
The Scottish economy. I think it's about time they coughed up. Let us put the plate out.
Nice one. This is why we have you on, and you come out with these pearls every so often. But you're quite into this as well, the land reform, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, there's the thing about being an independent nation is you get to reconsider. We should be doing the preparation. I thought we were doing the preparation. There was a time when we were down at Westminster in 2015, and we, the chief whip at the time, really, really good guy, Mike Weir, and he spoke to us. He says, look, we're looking to a phase where we're going to reach out to Europe, make friends, spread the word, make sure the door's open. And I don't know why it melted away, but it did. And a snap election didn't help, unfortunately, which kind of threw everything skew with. And then our focus was lost when the 56 were down there. I think the difference between the 56, there were fewer career parliamentarians amongst the 56. There were individuals who came from different walks of life, and many of us were not in it for the money. Many of us, like Philippa, lost money. Joanna lost money. Callum Kerr lost money. Iain Blackford, that he had a very successful career. I lost a lot of money on it. There was a lot of people who were in it for the right reasons that wouldn't ordinarily be seeking. I mean, I called myself the accidental politician, and many of us were, because we didn't really think the odds were in favour, but we wanted to fight for the cause. And when you get the chance to fight, you should forego remuneration. It's only money, But the sad thing is there's too many career politicians and people who are in it now who, quite frankly, will never, ever earn anything like this again. And surprise, surprise, they want to hang on to it. Yeah, well, now, in one sense, who can blame them? Me, I can blame them, because that's not why you should be there.
No, that brings me swiftly on to Pete Wishart. Yeah, that's a good segue. That my favourite MP, and I know I'm his favourite blogger and vlogger. I know that.
I know he won't be listening.
No, but he when all this carry on coming on about Owen Patterson and all the other stuff that flowed behind it, Peter got very upset that our Parliament, he said, has been brought into disrepute, and now he thinks to show cooperation, it'd be a good idea for Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, the leader of the independence movement in Scotland, to appear before a Westminster committee. Iain, how would you take that? If you were the leader and you were asked to appear before a committee by one of your own MPs?
Well, I'd question what the hell he was doing there in the first place, which is most of what the party have done ever since he got in. I mean, the number of people I know genuinely who are either non-party or Alba, who are intending, who don't even live in Perth, or Perthshire, wherever it is, who are planning to go and campaign for an Alba candidate in that constituency, in the hope,
I'm going to fund it.
in the hope that we can bring to an end that, as he often boasts, the longest-serving SNP MP Westminster. I'd be ashamed to have that as my logo.
He's too thick.
I mean, he's been there for all these years. What has he done to move Scotland forward? Nothing. And I mean, his great ambition was to be the Speaker of the House of Commons. He thought that was quite a clever move. It was only when he got ridiculed the length and breadth of Scotland, he said, "Oh, it was only a joke." No,
no.
It was a joke to us, but he was serious about it. He wanted the honour. He thought he was entitled to it because he'd been there 20 odd years, you know.
He'd probably accept a peerage as well.
Oh, he may well be the first ever SNP politician to accept a peerage, you know.
Who's first?
I'll only say one thing, one word: institutionalised.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. He's a Westminster lackey, without any question, you know.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
Because to me, we should be distancing ourselves further and further away from Westminster 100%. And everything, and pushing the door. Now, I am not at present, I would say, and this is my opinion, not the opinion of any political party, but I'm an abstentionist. And I would say at the moment, I would hate to see the two Alapa MPs lead, because they're actually holding the SNP to account down there and exposing them for how little they're doing. But I am an abstentionist going forward, that we shouldn't take up our seats. But we should move further and further away. You know, which brings me on to when you look, when we're critical of our First Minister for obvious reasons, but when I look at Boris Pepper the Pig this week, I mean, let's take off our hats as independentistas. If that's our Prime Minister and the people are looking at him, and it's like me going, "Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I'll hold it there, Pepper the Pig." I mean, it was cringy. It was worse than Nicola running about, finishing trying to get selfies with everyone. It was horrific, Iain.
It was a shame for him. He was 7 years late. If he'd only come out with that 7 years ago, my granddaughter would have thought he was okay, because she really liked it.
It was
grown up for that now. She thinks he's a bit of a nutter. But I mean, what can you say about Boris? I mean, his act is an act. He's not as stupid, as what he makes himself out to be. He uses this bumbling and all that to disrupt questioning, to buy himself time to think of a better response, all the rest of it. He's not stupid, and we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking he is. And he's leading a team of outlaws. He's a Robin Hood of Westminster. Him and his band of outlaws are robbing everyone in this country daily. Yep. And they're setting themselves up to bring in millions when they leave office, perhaps even before they leave office. And Boris won't be there that long, because you can only get away with that happy, Billy Bunter style for so long, and then it'll all cave in on him. But then the fun will really start. Who do we get next? Go, Rab, perhaps.
Well, Boris's bumbling buffoonery is deflection. That's what we need to remember. Exactly. He's schooled in the classics. We need to remember it's deflection, and that he is a puppet. So, like most leaders these days, they're not so much leading as pushed or led by the nose ring. And that's pretty much every leader on the planet, because it's pretty much if you become Prime Minister, you don't get to become Prime Minister in any country these days or a spokesperson on the BBC or an interview in the BBC if you don't think or are not trained to think a specific way. The only way you get the job is if you sign up to the deal.
Yeah, as Noam Chomsky said to Andrew Marr at the time he was interviewing him, if you didn't think the way they want you to think, you wouldn't be interviewing me today. Is exactly what he said.
Very good. Well, that's on the nail. When I watched it, I watched it because I watched Boris going into the chamber and ruffling his hair before he went in. You know, like, oh, lovable Boris. And here's the observation. And I mean, I spoke to him a few times. I don't know the man. But here's the thing I got speaking to there's some, guess what? There's some decent Tories out there down in London. There's some decent people. There is. Decent people, a wee bit confused, but decent people. And what they told me in confidence over a few whiskies was the people that know Boris hate him, but everybody else loves him.
We're running out of time. One last thing I'd like to cover, lads, before we go, and it's the tragic loss of life in the Channel this week of 30 souls, and at least one a child. It really is quite heartbreaking, and I noticed our First Minister was in and made a nice words about it. But I would just say to Nicola, you know, if we were independent, they wouldn't need to be taking a risk of their life across. We could open our doors and let them in, because we need immigrants, we need immigration. But it's a tragedy, and it'll get worse as the winter goes on, and the seas get rougher. And I don't know if there's a solution, Iain.
It's what we must always keep at the forefront of mind when we see these wars taking place. You know, it's bad enough watching the bombs drop and people getting shot and dead bodies in the streets, but it's the aftermath. The homes destroyed, the lives destroyed, forced migration of these people, you know. And, you know, it works at both ends. If you do a lot of bombing, you're going to see more migrants wanting to come to your country and get away from all that disaster and, you know, that your country and others are inflicting on them. Yeah. So it's very much a balance, and unfortunately, living in the UK, we're in the wrong end of the balance all the time.
Yep. Sadly, I saw some people, Phil, on social media reveling in this horrific thing. I mean, if this had been 30 Etonians killed in a school field trip, can you imagine the outpouring of grief there would be? Or 30 women from the Women's Institute who had been on a big bus trip. But because it's 30 brown people trying to illegally get into this country, as they would call it, it's already in the chip paper.
Right, well, there's a couple of things I think we have to be adult about. And we have to be adult about it. I say no to doors wide open. You cannot do that. This is a country of 5.3 million where there's limited capacity, and we haven't even looked after the people that are here. We are an open, inclusive, welcoming society, and I celebrate that. But there's a proper process that has to be followed for immigrants. We need immigrants because the people, Europeans, rich people don't breed as much as poor people. It's a simple fact. I'm sitting outside, there's fields full of people hand planting crops through necessity in a poverty-stricken area. It's not the same. It's different rules, and it's hell. I mean, the people who are complaining about the West really need to come and live here in northeast India. The wars you talked about by the West, the warmongers, the USA and Britain. If you caused the war, you should be responsible for fixing, patching up, saving people. By God, we should be in that sea.
There's no money in that, Phil. There's no money in that.
But we should be in the sea. We Scotland, as the people, we would help these people ashore, and we would get them back on their feet, and we would look after them. But thereafter, you can't encourage it by leaving your doors open. That is madness. It really is. Cuba, here's what happened. Castro in Cuba. America said, okay, you're communist now. We are the free America. We open our doors to all Cubans. They thought that was that was America's coming plan. Emptied the jails, put them all on a boat and sent them all over. Take it to America.
I mean, would they really notice a few more criminals in that country? I mean, let's be honest. Gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our time. As always, the time flies in when we're having fun. What's the next steps, Iain, that should be taken to avoid this, our Scottish National Health Service going, our water going, all the things that are coming down the line? What should we do now?
Well, it's quite clear, I think. I think your idea of the Citizens' Assembly, bringing all those that are affected in Scotland together, declaring, independence to be confirmed by a plebiscite election, that's the route to go. Nothing, can save us if we're tinkering around the edges. And that's all we've been doing. In fact, it's arguable whether we've even been tinkering. We've just been on receive, from and stuff for the last 7 years. So if we want to change things, we know what we've got to do. And part of that process means changing leadership of the Scottish National Party, the Scottish Government, because they are not going to do it.
No, we can't wait till 2024, Phil. The damage that can be done in the next 2 years and a month doesn't bear thinking about.
Well, it's 72 million a day you're losing from oil revenue,
just
from oil turnover. That's not profit, obviously. But really, 3 words.
Whiskey, gin.
All the rest of it. But independence, nothing less.
Correct. And on that note, gentlemen, we will call it quits. And I actually I don't know if you noticed, I hear it in Scotland, you'll be glad you're in Florida, Iain, and you're glad you're in India, because there's a freak, the jet streams drop south, so it's sucked in Arctic air, and over this weekend it's going to be the coldest weekend. My first time back in 3 years. I've got ice station zebra for my cloud, so I'm already getting ready. I've got my scarf on and looking at my woolly knickers and my survival gear. And I shall report back to you all next week. I'll maybe get a few re-interviews when I'm there, folks. That'll be amusing for you. And if you're going to Dunfermline, I'll look forward to saying hello and come up and say hello, especially if I'm in the bar. Say hello. And if you're going to the SNP conference, I wish you well online, and I hope it goes well for you, and I hope you get satisfaction. And that something comes out of it, because we have to get back together. We have to unite. We have to fight for Scotland.
Speak up. Be positive.
Correct.
Yeah. I got an interesting message from an SNP member this morning.
I've had a few.
Who was telling me that they've extended the deadline for being a delegate because either they hadn't got enough, or much more likely they need the money that a delegate brings in. But it suggests things are not particularly going well when the closing date was earlier in November, and they're still clambering out a few days before, looking for more folk.
And we've had to shut our doors at Alba. We've not got enough space for all the ones that want to go, which is great. And I look forward to seeing them until I speak to you, my viewers. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking to my two compadres here. Until I see you again soon, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.